Thank you, man. This sermon comes from an article I read in the Adventist Review from November 2021. And it is condensed from a sermon preached at the Walla Walla University Church on June 12 by Paul Dybdahl on graduation weekend. Paul is a professor at Walla Walla College in College Place, Washington. At the end of the sermon, I'll ask you to text your response to the sermon, and it'll appear on the screen. And I'd like to introduce today's sermon, and I'd like to practice that system. So let's do a practice run right now. Adri will switch us to where we need to be, and then if you text Jody Marsh 126, it has to be all caps. If you text that to this number, 22333, right? So text Jody Marsh 2126, all caps, to this number, and then answer this question, true or false? True or false? So this sermon comes from the scripture I just read about the feast at Simon's house. And according to the Bible, Simon invited Jesus to dine at his house because Jesus had healed Simon of leprosy. True or false? True or false? Oh, good, we got it. I was afraid it was all going to be true for a minute. We got some truths and falses. 13. Anyone need more time to get in? All right, I would say this one is false. Oh, good. False is going up. According to the Bible doesn't really say that Jesus healed Simon of leprosy. It says Jesus went to the house of Simon the leper. He wouldn't have gone to a person who actively had leprosy's house, of course. So it's kind of implied in the Bible that Jesus healed Simon of leprosy, but the Bible doesn't explicitly say so. In The Desire of Ages, Mrs. White does say that explicitly, but not in the Bible. Let's try a second one. If Adri can navigate us to the second question. I'm putting a lot of pressure on our AV operators today. Here's our second question. So you don't have to text the Jody Marsh thing. Many commentators think Luke's account is a separate incident. So there were 2 times when a woman came and poured perfume on Jesus' head and feet. Many commentators think Luke's account is a separate incident. Luke's account is different in several ways. He's the only one who says it was a Pharisee's house. He's the only one that tells the story where Jesus says, Simon, I have a question for you. I'd be very nervous if Jesus said that to me. But Simon says, go on, and then Jesus tells the story about the 2 debtors. The other 3 Gospels all tell about Judas being upset, and Luke doesn't include that part. And in Luke's Gospel, the story is very early in the Gospel, and in the other 3 Gospels, it's at the end. So for those reasons, many commentators, many non-Adventist commentators, do think that Luke's account is a separate incident, and so that this incident happened 2 times. Most Adventist commentators disagree, and they think it was all one incident. So I'd have to say this one's true. Back to the slideshow. At the end of the sermon, I'll ask you to text a response, and it'll appear on the screen. I'm sorry, Adri, can you unlock the third question so it's ready to go at the end. Yeah. All right, this sermon starts with a hard truth, but don't be discouraged. There'll be encouragement from Jesus, and there'll be good news at the end. We live in a society that actively fosters optimistic expectations. Right? It's considered socially acceptable, even wise, to regularly remind people of their limitless potential. Walk into almost any classroom, and you'll probably see a poster like this. Right? You can do anything's possible. Anything is possible. If you Google graduation speeches or graduation products, you'll find millions of hits, of course. Here are two examples. One example is, I hope that all of us here today can take this personal accomplishment as an example of how anything is truly possible when we put our minds to it. And example two, it is after you graduate that you spread your wings wide and fly out into the world to explore the world in pursuit of your dreams and goals. Okay? These are happy quotations, to be sure, but I have a problem with them. The first one, that anything's truly possible if you put your mind to it, is clearly and demonstrably false. And the second one, if you imagine that you will spread your wings and fly, brace yourself for some sad news. You might be smart, fit, determined, and hardworking, but you will not fly. Because you are not a bird. In a culture that says you can do anything, this hard truth must be acknowledged. Humans are amazing, but we can't do everything, right? Our limitations are evident in several areas. Right? We have physical limitations, right? As a 55-year-old man, there are things I can't do, right? I'll never bear children. Thankfully, I don't have those parts, right? I'll never be an Olympic hurdler. My legs are too short. Don't use it as too much of an excuse. Certainly, I could expand my physical capacity through better diet, exercise, training, but there are certain things I can't do. It's true for me, it's true for you. There's certain things we can't do. We can't do everything physically. We have limitations in other areas. We have mental limitations. For some people, math comes quick, right? Others look at that and have no idea what it says. But for some people, math comes easy, but we can't understand a word of poetry. Some people find languages easy to learn, others, but they can't play the piano or carry a tune in a bucket. Some people are good at reading books, others are good at reading people. We have different abilities. We can improve what abilities we have through study, but there are certain things we can't do mentally and emotionally. Sadly, even the things we can do, society might not let us do. Society says we can't do things because we're too old or too young. I grew up in farm country, and I knew 12-year-old boys who could drive a tractor and back up 2 trailers full of hay into the barn straight as an arrow. But of course, they couldn't drive legally on the highway, right? Society said they were too young to drive. Society limits what we can do based on our gender. Maybe not as bad as it used to be, but still society pushes people in certain directions. In our church, we have 4 or 5 doctors, all men, 4 or 5 nurses, all women, right? Society pushes people in certain directions. Our society limits people based on their gender. Unemployment rate for some minorities is 2 or 3 times the unemployment rate for others. Society limits us based on our religion or our past mistakes or on the way we look. Right? Want to be a news anchor for Fox? Better be beautiful. We're even limited spiritually and morally. The Bible says we all have spiritual gifts, but the Spirit gives different gifts to different people. That means you can serve God in ways I can't. We're limited morally. We might not be able to take certain lucrative jobs because they might require some shady dealings or because we have to work on Sabbath. And saddest of all, the gifts we do have, the abilities we do have, and the ones that society will let us use will only diminish over time. We can't run as fast as we once did. We can't learn as easily. Society might view us as insignificant or obsolete as we get older. Chronic pain or disease might lower our own self-worth. Yes, time will only diminish time will only increase the long list of things that we can't do. This harsh reality hurts, right? Our pain is heightened when we compare ourselves who have maybe a shorter list of things they can't do, and it's easy to be filled with anger, resentment, or despair. Right? We might even blame God, or we might even give up. If I can't do what I want to do, I'll do nothing. The problem's too big. It's too big for me. I can't solve it. I'll just give up and do nothing. No, we're not birds. There are things we can't do. So how do we respond? How do we move forward when we live in a broken world like this? As usual, Jesus has the answer, and it's found in a single sentence in a famous story found in all 4 Gospels. It was our scripture reading today. Bethany was a town 2 miles from Jerusalem, and Jesus went there just 2 days before his crucifixion. While there, he went to a banquet at the house of Simon the leper. During the banquet, a woman, unnamed in Mark, but identified as Mary in John's Gospel, enters the banquet hall with an alabaster jar full of very expensive ointment or perfume, pure nard, made from plants grown in the Himalaya mountains. Very expensive, worth probably a year's wages for an unskilled laborer, so maybe $30,000 in today's money. She breaks the alabaster jar, pours it on Jesus' head or feet, or both, depending on which gospel you read. And the people at the banquet are upset. It was too expensive. The money should have been spent on the poor. And it's here that Jesus responds. Jesus says, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. She did what she could." And there's the point of today's sermon. With this affirmation, Jesus provides a way forward in a world where not everything is possible for us. We face limitations, but so did this woman. In first century Judea, educational opportunities for women were very limited, if they existed at all. Women couldn't divorce their husbands, but their husbands could divorce them. Women were segregated at worship. They were expected to stay home and do the chores. If they left the house, they had to put a veil on. Women were definitely second-class citizens. The Mishnah of the time lists some groups that could not give testimony in court. They include Gentiles, deaf mutes, gamblers, here's the worst one, pigeon racers, slaves, children, the insane, and women. Yes, this woman had a lengthy list of things she couldn't do, but it didn't lead to passivity or hopelessness. Somehow she got the perfume, and Jesus said in her defense, she did what she could. And in so doing so, she stands in a long line of Bible characters who couldn't do everything, but who did what they could. Rahab was a foreigner. She didn't have paperwork to prove she was a descendant of Abraham. She couldn't boast of an honorable occupation. She lived in a city where the property values were about to come crashing down. But she could hang a scarlet cord in her window, right? She did what she could. He was only a shepherd boy. He couldn't join the army because he was too young. He couldn't command the army because he had no authority. He couldn't wear Saul's armor because he was too small, but he could pray, and he knew how to use a sling. He did what he could. The Bible is full of stories of people with limited options who did what they could. Could you give me an example? In my homework assignment, I ask you to think of examples. Can you give me an example of someone in the Bible, other than the two I gave, of someone with limited options who did what they could? Charlene. Joseph. Very limited options, a slave in Potiphar's house. But he did what he could. Grace. Esther. An orphan who did what she could. Jael. Pounded a spike through the Sisera's head, right? Jonah did what he could. The Bible is full of stories of people in the Bible who had limited options, but who did what they could. I had two more examples I thought someone would take. Little lad. That's his name in the Bible story books. His name is not even recorded in the Bible. He didn't own a barn full of enough wheat to feed 5,000 people, or own a fish processing plant that had enough fish for 5,000 men, women, and children. But he knew how to fish. He knew how to carry his mother's bread, and he knew how to offer it. He did what he could. The little maid, stolen from her family, taken 1,000 miles away and sold into slavery to serve to do menial chores for a pampered wife of a high government official. Knows nothing about how to cure leprosy, but she knew a prophet, and she told about him. She did what she could. The Bible is full of stories of people with limited options who couldn't solve every problem, couldn't solve big problems, but they did what they could. And they inspire us. And there are stories of people today with limited options who do what they can. Author and speaker Barbara Glanz tells about one such person. Barbara was giving a presentation at a conference for a large chain of grocery store employees. In that conference, she told the employees, provide memorable experiences for your customers, and they'll come back. So Barbara got a phone call from Johnny a few days later. Johnny started the phone call by saying, I'm just a bagger, and I have Down syndrome, but I want to make a difference. Here's my idea. I like sayings. So each day, my dad and I will look up some sayings on the computer. We'll print off a couple hundred. I'll cut them up into strips of paper, and when people come through my line, I'll say, I hope you like my saying, and I'll drop the strip of paper in their bag. Barbara was like, great idea, Johnny. Give it a try. She never expected to hear from him again. But 3 weeks later, there was a call from Johnny's manager. There was a problem. The manager was walking the floor, and he noticed that one line was 3 times longer than the others. So he went to the back of the line, and he was like, do we have shorter lines over here? Nobody budged, right? Everybody wanted to see Johnny's saying. Johnny couldn't do everything, but he did what he could. The beautiful moments in our lives are made up of stories of people who can't do everything, but who do what they can. Maybe it was a smile from someone not a supermodel that made your day. Or maybe it was a picture given to you by a child not named Michelangelo. Or a friend who sat with you and listened and cried and gave you a hug to get you through a hard time. Or maybe it was a teacher who will never make the news, but who believed in you before you believed in yourself. Or a parent or a church member who worked hard and lived simply so you could get a Christian education. If we take the time to reflect, we can all think of someone who couldn't do everything, but who did what they could on our behalf. I'd like you to take a moment and reflect. and write on my sermon notes there, a time when someone who couldn't do everything did something for you on your behalf. Take a moment and reflect on that and write something down. We have time this morning. Is anyone willing to share a time when someone couldn't do everything for you on your behalf, but did what they could? Bob.
This happened many, many years ago. We were desperately struggling to make ends meet. And to make a long story short, I was doing literature work at the time. I was expecting a check. I called the electric company in the bank and telephone company saying I'd have a steam into them because they were foreclosed and turn off electricity and everything. And to make a long story short, when I got my check, it was $50. And we were just devastated. We were kneeling and praying on Monday morning when we got a knock at the door. And the guy from City Delivery was there. And he asked me if I was Bob. And I said, yeah. And he said, your wife named Paula, yeah. And he said, well, I don't know how to tell you this. We deliver packages from businesses in the community. Never done residential homes, but one of our drivers came out, found this envelope on the seat of his truck. And then and he showed it to me. It said Bob Paul's Taxi, 104 Adolph Street. That may ring a bell to so many people who were living at the time and how we were living. But he said, we want you to sign for it in case somebody comes back at us. And we have a record of what we did with the money because we believe it's for you.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know what was in it, but when we opened it up, there were 6 $100 bills in there.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And I don't know if the person that did that for us, what kind of gifts or talents they had, but I do know how much my faith jumped in God because of that.
Thank you for sharing, Bob. Someone else, a time when someone helped you, they did what they could. They couldn't do everything, but they did what they could. Margaret. Thank you for sharing, Margaret. That is a wonderful story. Someone else willing to share. Yes. Thank you for sharing. That's wonderful. Our life is full of people who can't do everything, but who do what they can. Each one of us faces a life full of limitations. We can spend our time comparing ourselves to others. We can be consumed with anger, resentment, and despair about what we can't do or about what society prevents us from doing. We can succumb to hopelessness and passivity. At this very moment, there's probably an area of your life where the future seems bleak and where all of our efforts seem in vain. We may have even said, well, I can't do anything. But there's a better way. Remember the woman of Bethany, right? Remember Rahab and little lad and little maid and David. Do what you can. And we ought to remember one more. If ever there was someone with limited options, it was the thief on the cross. He couldn't change his past. He was dying in physical agony and shame. It seemed he had no options left. As the moment of death drew near, it seemed he had no options left. But he did what he could. He called on Jesus. Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Each one of us could face a similar situation. Your future may not be easy. Life might present you with an unending series of challenges and disappointments. But if you ever find yourself in a place where all doors are closed and it seems there's nothing you can do, this option will always be open to you. You can always call on Jesus. And if you do, death won't be the end of your story. No, you will rise. You will rise from your grave. You will rise into the sky. Yes, you will fly, even though you are not a bird. Let's stand and sing our closing hymn, For All the Saints. Be seated, please. One day, an old man was walking along the beach after a storm. Thousands, maybe millions of starfish washed up on the shore. In the distance, he sees a boy flinging starfish into the ocean one by one. He walks up to the boy and says, "What are you doing?" The boy says, "These starfish will die if I leave them here. The tide is going out. So I'm flinging him into the ocean." And the man looked incredulously up and down the shore. "Boy, you can't possibly make a difference." The boy thought a minute, picked up one and chucked it into the ocean. Made a difference for that one. I can't solve every problem in the world, but I can do what I can. It's my prayer today that when we meet Jesus, he'll say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You did what you could." If you would, text a response to that same number. I can't do everything, but I can. And your responses will show up on the screen. As you exit, I have a starfish for you. What?